It's fantastic to be here today as the State Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart is a partner university with the Academy here. And we really, we're really happy about the relationship and also the activities which are going on, one of which will start on Monday as well, the exhibition. But today, I just have the privilege to talk a little bit about the view of the world, maybe of an architect. And so I'm an architect and I teach, but I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, and probably also not, well, not as articulate in some things as we have heard today. But what I'm going to show is how to live in today's world and how to start to make sense of what we're doing and also dealing with our own emotions. And so one of the things I think what's interesting of being an architect actually is that, as Churchill said, first we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. We've heard about that before from Tiffany about, the power of words and emotions, that they can also change the course of history. And so in a way, I don't want to say that as architects we are fantastic and we can change the course of history, because we can shape buildings and then buildings shapes how people interact. But in a certain way that could be possible. And I think we have to be aware of the responsibility that comes with the ability to change certain things. And especially that's what I would like to talk about today, about the emotions and about like reflecting about these potentials or possibilities which we have. And then you see something like this, and that was actually my starting point. So in the year 2000, actually, sorry for the mistake here, it's in the year 2000, the term Anthropocene was coined. And it actually refers back, it's meant to start in the 1950s with a great acceleration. And basically what it says is that the impact of humans, of all of us, we actually, well, one of the most decisive factors on the planet. We can term it in negative ways. We screwed up the systems of the earth. So there's all the cyclic systems, but suddenly we came and our interventions are overruling the natural processes. And so in a positive way, we can say, well, but we're moving towards renewable energy and we're doing all of this. And isn't Tuscany also a man-made cultural landscape and so on? Well, that's one thing, but of course we're all aware of all the other things. And I'm not going to go into this. Usually this is meant to make people afraid of things, afraid of change and so on. I think it's a positive thing, because if we are aware of what's happening, climate crisis, which generates migration, we also have the pandemics and so on, we all have experienced this, we should think about it, how powerful we actually are. And of course, that we need to do something, we need to wake up basically and think about what that actually means. And if anyone's still doubting this, then this is what came a couple of weeks ago, the so-called planetary boundaries. By now we have, well, managed to cross 6 out of 9, which means that whatever we did is irreversible. So that's something which we could all be afraid of and could say, okay, forget about it. This is not going to go well anymore. And, we have to, I don't know, it could be something where the emotion could be so overwhelming that we have to stop existing. I think we should really, and we have to try dealing with it. And as architects, as I just said, if you look at the United Nations sustainability goals, there are 18 goals. Some of them, you just look at the pictures, you already see architecture or built environment in the background. And some of them, of course, it's more indirect, but most of them have to deal with what architects and maybe designers should be doing, which is providing shelter and providing livable environments for humans, especially also in areas where maybe the planet is not habitable because it's too hot or it's too cold or whatever. And we could also say, with the aspect that we have 8 billion people living on the planet, we have to start, we already started populating areas which previously hadn't been thought of as something where humanity could actually survive. The good thing about this is that I think when we train people as architects, and I was trained like this, we are generalists. We are not good at any particular things, but we have a certain understanding how things are connected, are interconnected, and maybe we in simple terms, just know whom we should ask. Yes, so there's a lot of questions out there, and somebody has to try to break it into maybe different elements and really go and ask the relevant people. At the same time, we are also, and this comes from Venice Architecture Biennale in 1996, when the curator said architects are seismographers of society. And I think there's something true about it. I mean, we all, that's why I had Marshall McLuhan before, which I didn't explain. But of course, we are able to shape the environment in a certain way, but we also, well, inhabiting the environment at the same time. So we should be very sensitive to what we're actually doing. And I'm not talking here about architects, coming and trying to change the world in their face. That's absolutely not the point. It should be much more humble. It should be understanding what the needs are, what we like, what makes us happy, what makes life comfortable, or what really makes it possible to discuss with other people. And these spaces, that's what we should try to create. So on one hand, we can say that we are also responsible of what has happened on the planet, because if you look at this, anything that's building activity related takes 60% of the global resources, 35% of the energy, it produces 50% of the waste that's all around, and 50% of CO2 emissions. So that means there's a big lever here. There's a lot we can do to change that. And we have to. It's also the responsibility. One of my favorite architecture theorists is actually Cedric Price. And he talked about architecture as not about finished buildings, which we very often assume when we look at fancy magazines and so on, but about an ability to enable and facilitate change in a changing world. Well, and what he called to think the unimaginable. And that's quite interesting, because we think usually that we first have to imagine everything, and anything that can be imagined can also be implemented. But before it can be imagined, it might have to be thought, or maybe we can think about things which are hard to visualize. And that's an interesting way. So we're going back to the emotions. Maybe it's an emotional reaction to something that triggers different ways of expression, and that allows us to do certain things. So I think today's question for architects, and maybe for designers as well, is how can we keep this planet habitable and provide a good living environment for people? And maybe we have to go beyond this. And that's why I'm saying we need to go beyond the Anthropocene, also for life in general. As you can see here, that's a quick sketch a couple of years ago. And this is not meant to be a realistic scenario. We developed this idea once to explain to people what's going to happen, because modernity very much, well, works on the idea of a centralized order, and also the idea of there's always opposites. So something is either natural, or it is cultural, or it's or natural or technology. We always work with these opposites. But what if there were no opposites? Because in the end, we have one planet, and everything needs to coexist. So maybe the cities of the future, or the dwellings of the future, need to be something where you can't really draw a line and say, oh, up to here is nature, and from here on it's human, or this is public and that is private, or this is related to mobility and this is related to growing food. It's just an illustration for this. It's actually just for food of thought, actually, to discuss. And the discussion should be, how do we want to live, and how do we want to make this possible? And so one of the things, for instance, we have big discussions in Germany about the cars. You know, cars is the holy cows of Germany, is our car industry. And everybody wants to be sustainable. So what is sustainability for the car industry? You take a big SUV, you exchange the engine from a combustion engine to an electric engine, and then you have a sustainable, you can drive, you can keep driving, and everything is sustainable. But that's completely besides the point. We have to change the system. Why does a car need to weigh 3 tons? Why do we drive a car to go to the bakery 2 minutes away? All of this, that needs to be looked at. It's not the technology. It's also not the change of the technological means we're using. It's the change about our way of thinking, like our position in the world. I think that is what we need to rethink. And if I look at what I'm confronted with or working with, or I'm allowed to work with as an architect every day, is like, okay, the first thing would be we create comfortable spaces, a space like this one here, where everybody loves to mingle, where we exchange ideas. So we design to connect. And architecture definitely can enhance social interaction. If you don't feel like a space is actually the right space to talk to somebody, you're not going to do that. There are buildings with, there's research actually that can we make people more creative, stimulating people by by the design of their workplace? And actually the answer is yes, we can. And that's quite interesting, but it's not only just about the design and making it nice. It's also about stimulation. So things have to change, things have to be interesting. Something has to happen over time. So we need to design in 4 dimensions, not just in 3. And a couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to design a German pavilion for an expo. Of course, the first reaction is, who needs an expo? We all know the Paris Eiffel Tower. That was the time of expos and its big trade shows to promote the export of goods. Of course, not anymore. Then the next question is, why in Dubai? You know, isn't Dubai this fantasy built on sand somewhere far away and you go there for holidays? Well, if you look at all of this, it tells you more about our own preconceptions than maybe about the places which are there. So one of the things was, once you design it, the question is, how would you design it and what's the reason? Well, the reason why we did it is because Dubai is one of the crossing points of the world where you could, it's not far away from India. It's very close to Africa. It's actually very close to Europe as well. And of course, it's in the Arab Peninsula. So you already have a place where you can discuss certain things. And if we want to discuss about sustainability and maybe how to do this, it's probably a good place because, yes, we should reduce our footprint. And yes, there are other people who have an even larger footprint. But in the end, if we don't convince everybody to work together, it's not going to happen. So that is important to go there. Well, as architects, for us, the most important thing is to create a space that is open and a space that reflects these sort of discussions and is not preconceived, like is not telling somebody else what to do. This would be colonialism. It's more being open and saying we have to offer this and we're open for discussion. So what was nice to see is actually these sort of, and during COVID, of course, everybody had to wear a mask, but to see that the building triggered these interactions. And it became one of the most liked pavilion where people took their kids to really discuss about technology and how technology would affect or would change their lives. And that is something which I would say is definitely worth doing. Even though it's a building for 6 months, it will be taken down. There's a lot of CO2 emissions, people traveling there and so on. But we should stop looking at everything only in quantifiable means. There is something beyond just the quantities, which are like the hard factors, which you always face in building. Every building has a price, but nobody ever looks at the emotional price of a building, you know, or the quality what a building actually should have. Yeah, we can use the same amount of money to build this structure or that structure or any other structure, but it doesn't say anything about the how people interact and if people really appreciate it and if there is really like these are all the soft factors, you know, like and I think also move away from these sort of opposites. The other one would be to move away from the well-established criteria. We have to be able to start to rethink these criteria. An emotional value of a building should be as important as a technical value of the resources which have been put in. Isn't that the same for every piece of art? If we look at all these pieces hanging here, we could talk about the price of the canvas and the framing and maybe the paint. But at the end of the day, is that the value of a painting? Definitely not. Yeah. In architecture, we look at that all the time. Everybody talks about just the property has a certain value and the value increases and the sales, like you could sell it for whatever. But that's not really, that shouldn't really be the governing factor. Anyway, so I'll keep going with a couple of things just for the other one is what we could do as architects and also as designers, I think, is define narratives. And the narratives is really explaining what are these emotional values of structures. Yeah. So here we're working on a project which is for the city of Heidelberg. It's a small city, quite known along the river Neckar. And they have a fantastic network of what do you call this in English? Like it's a hot water piping system delivering energy to everybody. So they're completely independent from oil or gas, which is, of course, was quite useful during the last couple of years. The question is, you still need to store the energy. If the windmill produces energy or the solar power panels produce power, but you need it at a different time, you need to build a tower. So we're building a tower for the city of Heidelberg. The problem is that this tower, which is meant to become an icon for the change towards post-fossil society and renewable energy, would simply look exactly like the gas storage tower, which was there before. It's a big cylindric drum. So the question was, how can you give it emotionally a different, or how can you change the emotions and explain to people that this actually is a positive building because it's a move towards renewable energy? And the client was quite clever. What they actually said is, okay, we put a public structure on top. We have a restaurant and a viewing platform for everybody. We also have an edutainment center where we can explain to people what's actually happening. And for instance, this building itself is quite an interesting element. It's like the biggest thermos you could possibly build. So there is 115-degree hot water at the bottom, 40,000 liters. And then actually on the upper part, you see here, there's cold water on top to make sure that the whole building doesn't explode. It's a bit like your pressure cooker. The pressure cooker has a big, massive ring on top. There is no massive ring at the diameter of 25 meters anymore. And then you sit on top of the pressure cooker. Well, anyway, but that's a safe building. Well, our job was how to turn this building into something which people would like to experience. And so the idea is there's a second skin around the building, and there are elevators as well, but there's a staircase, and the staircase just extends your movement all around. So you can walk up, which is actually, it takes a couple of minutes. Maybe people would rather go down. It's both possible. And that staircase is actually suspended from the top. So you're actually between heaven and earth. You're just walking around, you're watching your city at the time. And of course, everything between this metal mesh, actually, I'll show that. There's also special facade. At the bottom, there's also something explaining how the building works, why you need this building, how this is actually part of why it is important for the city. Then this is what you would experience when you're going up there. And in the end, the question still remains, why is that renewable energy and how could we explain that to people? So the idea is that there will be a network of smaller aluminum elements which will just move in the wind and reflect the sun or the light in different ways. And that really reminds people that this energy is produced in a different way. Okay, you could say, isn't that pure decoration? Well, even if it was, we were looking into using these for photovoltaics. The problem is that putting cables between movable structures like this, the cables would break and would not last 25 years. So there's a problem to connect all of it. But at the end, maybe it's not even important. The little bit of energy we would win additionally is not the point. The point is that now there's the old castle at the end of this picture, and there's something new. And this new thing, yes, it's a technical part, but at the same time, it becomes a public part. It's owned by the public. The government or the city of Heidelberg owns that facility. So it belongs to everybody. And I think that we also found an expression that this building here, the silver elements are still, the diamonds are still missing. They will be put up soon. But that this building also, well, resembles something where everybody can be proud of and where people have something in their city, which is infrastructure, but it is also something that makes people, that has a positive connotation. If we move more beyond this, but it's still part of the Anthropocene, you could say, we're still only thinking about people, we're talking about energy, we're talking about renewable energy, but not about much else. But what if we would move beyond this? And we called it like planning with nature. What if we would treat a building like an ecosystem? So a building is not just a dead object, but a building is actually something that is alive and something that really works with in a cyclic nature. At the Academy, we're talking about a studio which we called ecopuncture. So the idea of if you have ecology and acupuncture together, and of course with architecture, you put it into ecopuncture. So the idea is that it's defined by Nirmal Krishnani said it actually, it's acts of design that repair, restore, and regenerate, seeking connectedness of human-made and natural systems. If you read this, you wonder why not every building is already conceived like this, because it sounds so logical that it should be I mean, that should definitely be something, I don't think anybody could be against that as a concept. In reality, that is not practiced very often. So looking at that would actually mean that rather than just designing forms, and especially not stable or forms that can never change, we should really look at the processes and cycles. So of course, energy and water are very important. The other one is all the resources that are used for the materials. In Germany, we call the gray energy, energy embedded in the production of the materials. And that's why taking things down should really be the last means. Anything that's been put up, there's a lot of energy also embedded, and there's a lot of potential in that. And we should really first try to deal with it, to use it, to put it into something else. So the structure you see here used to be, it's a parking lot. Here, the proposal was to turn a parking lot into small individual housing. So, but I'll talk about another building. That was actually a building we dealt with. It was called Life. That was not our name, and it's in Hamburg. And the idea of the client was actually amazing. It was a non-school, which was already fantastic for us, you know. So the idea is you build spaces for lifelong learning. What does that actually mean? You know, usually we think learning is what children do. So first they go to school or they go to kindergarten, then you go to school, then you go to university, but then learning is over. Well, that's also a completely wrong conception, as we all know. I think the great thing of working in a creative way is that all of us know that we are constantly learning and we're constantly learning new things. Like today, we learned many, many different things. It's really fantastic. The that's the best thing about conferences like this, that you learn so much. Yeah, everybody learns from everybody else. So this was meant to be a space for lifelong learning. And once you do this, you do not discuss about school rooms or kindergarten chambers or whatever. You can suddenly discuss about rooms for group activities, rooms for communication, rooms where you can discover something, rooms where you can express yourself, rooms where you're by your own and you just immerse yourself into something. And that's interesting because it frees up architecture from these preconceived typologies of a space for one person needs to be this big and you need to have that sort of environment. I think at the end of the day, we all know pretty well how we want to do certain things. And so it's good if there's more freedom for it. So we also responded to this brief by saying, okay, then we do not start with a gridded system and some boxes and certain sizes, but we design qualities. So we say, okay, there are areas which are more related to green. There are areas which are more related to light. There are areas which are more related to being on your own. And of course, you can mix everything. So you can be on your own in the light, in the green, yeah, maybe. Or you can, so all of this can be combined, but it could be separate. And we only mapped intensities. And with these intensities, you start defining things in a different way. Suddenly the question is, what is a door? Yeah, it's a hole in the wall that can be closed. Maybe it can be closed visually. Maybe it's just an acoustic closure. So suddenly all these boundaries become something else. And it's very inspiring to just make one step back and to redefine what actually all these sort of elements could be. So at the end of the design, this was, for instance, a proposal. It's an inside space that has a certain outdoor quality. It's almost like you sit in the forest under some trees. And the design of it is in such a way that you can use it for a concert, you could use it for a lecture, you could also have individual smaller people teaching classes in certain areas, but you're all together in a centralized space. And this is actually the space where you can access everything else from. Or for instance, the facade. What if the facade is not just one wall? If the facade is something where you can be somewhere between inside and outside. So here the facades were so deep that in the day, like, well, now, not in the morning, but now you could actually do the activities outside, but you would still be sheltered. You can still control the noise to a certain extent. So it's redefining different elements, which we all know in a different, in a creative way. And at the end of the day, of course, you start to think about, okay, we have water in the building. Where can we collect water? Where can we harvest energy? And how would we make this also, well, it's a house for lifelong learning or space, so you should also make it, you should also express it. So the entire landscape is actually designed in such a way that you can follow the water that comes from the building. What was nice here is that we told the client wanted to have a green roof. just like that, you know. And so we said, yeah, you can have a green roof, but in a city like Hamburg, maybe half of the year you could be outside on the green roof. Plus, you have a very big garden anyway. Why would you not put, well, and put photovoltaic on the roof and generate all the energy you need in your building? You generate on your own roof. And of course, we still made it accessible at the center. But that became the next story to say, okay, what does a building need to do? It creates comfort, but we can do this by reducing the amount of carbon that's needed. So, and there's usually two things. Yeah, as I said, the gray energy. So what do you put into the building to build it? We decided to have a wooden building for that, because that's the calculation is still that there's carbon stored. Of course, it's also not the solution for everything, but that's one thing. And the other one is that the building needs to produce as much energy as it uses. To have a building that's actually that can regenerate itself. Because most of the buildings we're building as architects is like patients in an emergency hospital. Like they have all these pipes running in, and the moment you stop the pipe, the building would be would not function anymore, or would actually deteriorate. So the idea is that we design something with the ability to propel itself for a much longer time. Of course, this is still in theory, it works much better because we all don't know how much sun we will harvest, how we can, you need a storage element and so on. But at least it should be our aim that whatever we're doing makes the world better, and not the world better here where we are and with the burden or the rucksack or whatever we want to call it in the so-called global south, but really as something which works with its environment and is also deeply rooted in this system. So the next pavilion, we're back to another pavilion. We won the competition again for the German pavilion at Expo 2025 in Japan. The motto of Japan is designing future society for our lives. Okay, it's quite vague. At the same time, it also deals with it. Like, we're not just designing a building, we're also designing something which has the aspect of community and society. So our proposal for the building actually was that if we do anything there, this pavilion should be like a manifesto. It's a designed manifesto. It's a prototype. And of course, what's the topic of the time is actually circularity, like a building which you can erect, but you can also take down with a minimal amount of waste, ideally no waste at all. And you really reuse the materials. So this building there will only be for 6 months up there. So the question is, what's the afterlife of the building? Previously, people built buildings, shipped everything there, and in the end, it all ended as landfill, or it was sort of reused. That's also an interesting discussion, which we could have somewhere else, about circularity. And because people are saying the most circular material in the world, which probably nobody would guess, you know what it is? It's steel. There's 99% of the steel that had ever been produced is still in use, because it is so expensive and so energy intensive to produce that people do not throw it away. If we could say the same about plastics, the world would be a much better place. Yeah, but so steel, yes, the production is very CO2 intensive, but at least it gets reused. So anyway, most of the materials used to be just, maybe with the exception of valuable materials, to be dumped for landfill. But this building, we said, needs to be completely different. First of all, the medium is the message. So the building should really be something that integrates architecture, exhibition, and the landscape. And the landscape, again, as something which is not only the life of plants and animals, where plants, animals, and humans come together, but that's also a hardworking piece of infrastructure. So at the end of the day, this is an exhibit we had already in Expo in Dubai. But here the idea was really to show people like all the facets of the planet and what that what emotions that actually creates. Because then people really realize that, oh, there's a lot of other species around which are not that different from us, and they have different needs and so on. Going back to circular construction. So circular construction would actually mean not that we build circles, well, we did that as well, but that we reduce the amount of material to the absolute minimum, that every material, we do not use composite materials. I know it's very hard in industrial design. No composite materials, and materials that can always be all the connections are done in such a way that you can disconnect or disassemble as easy as possible, and you can reuse whatever you have. That's quite difficult because at the end of the day, certain shapes, certain forms are not possible anymore. So you really, if you design the building like this, that impacts your, well, the language or the pattern or whatever, the dimensions, whatever you want to call it. So in our case here, you see that the building has a relatively simple shape. Everything is actually sized to elements which are easily available, elements which can be reused afterwards. But the simplicity might also become something which is quite nice. Yeah, so there is no suspended ceilings. There's really, it's reduced to the bare minimum. Everything that's structurally there is also visually there. And it's only a very limited palette of materials, and the colors are also coming from the materials. So it is something simple, but at the same time, it creates a comfortable space and something which appears to be natural. Going back to the landscape is also an ecosystem. We collect all the rainwater. We also use the water from flushing the toilets. Actually, there is this sort of external purification plant. So the whole building becomes something, the landscape, actually all the plants, we just hire the plants. The plants come from an existing nursery. For 6 months, they spend time at the expo, and later on they go back to the nursery. That's the only way to have bigger plants in this whole as a landscape in 6 months' time, and also making sure that actually they're taken care of in the best possible way. So they basically stay in pods, and then there's just grass and certain fast-growing elements actually connecting the other elements. So at the end, we think that a building, we hope that we can show that even for a building that only lasts for 6 months' time, we can do something that has a lasting impact on the thinking, and thinking in cycles, and thinking in, let's say, maybe changing our priorities as designer is not the big gesture which we want to make, is actually something which works also in a much larger picture. Okay, now in the very end, I'll just show you a couple of little things. At the Academy, we also did something after Corona. It was really important. We saw wonderful workshops just before to really get out and do something by hand. So we built something which we called the Circularity Lab. That was just the summer project last year, where we started with looking into permaculture, looking into well, different ways of living within this world, feeling as part of the world. Is not also, we are not, as humans, we are not outside nature, we're part of nature. So once you understand that, you also design in different ways. So what did we do with the students? The first thing is we went out to a Brandenburg site. It's a large plot of land which my wife and I own, where we have a permaculture farm. And the first thing the students had to do is put up their tent. So that's the first thing. You create the space where you're going to stay for the next week together. Then everybody was cooking together. Everything was rather simple out there. And we developed a structure for the space out there. So we started looking into relatively simple elements, things we could do ourselves. We worked with mycelium as growing material. You know, that's, I'm sure people have done projects here using mycelium. It's a revolution in the sense that material is not dead matter. You see how certain things grow. And the idea is that things could grow further. You can repair it in a completely different way. Gives you a completely different understanding of what material could actually be. We also worked across disciplines. So we also worked with the textile people to develop a fabric which we could span into these, into the triangular structure, where we used we brought together different ideas and old technique. It's always about, I think architecture or building could be very much about low or no technology or traditional ways of doing it in combination with more modern ways of doing it. So we also used the robot arm to 3D print ceramics to get some openings into the mycelium patterns. The most of the work was actually dealing with the wood. And that's a lot of work actually for something very simple. So in the end, creating all these triangles in this structure. But the great thing was we could all do something. Everybody could contribute. So it was a collaboration, and it was also participation. That's the different thing. If you design something as architects for clients, you have the contractors doing the work or the craftsmen doing the work. It's all very indirect. the great thing about something like this, you build something, it's your own, you are your own client, your own contractor, you have all the, you're just doing it and you're doing it together. And that was really a fantastic experience. So at the end, this is what happened at the opening of our summer show. We just had this pavilion out there and people came to have a look what that actually is. And then the students could explain how it was actually built and what actually what the reason for it was. And that's the great thing, you know, you create curiosity, and that allows people to really start a conversation. And these conversations hopefully have the potential to change something. It's not the buildings that change something. I think is the dialogue between people that build something that changes the world. And hopefully this is actually my last slide. So I think to go back to modernity, and I've been fighting against modernity all along, but so we go from the famous less is more to actually more with less. It's not always that less is more, and especially if it's just from a formal reason. I think we all have to create more with less. So we have more fun, we have more collaborations, maybe we are more emotional, and we're using less material, less resources, and less measurable things to do that. And I think so we need to change the way we think, but that's not enough. We also have to change the way we live as a to create a transition basically from the existing situation to hopefully a situation where we can, well, keep the planet livable. And I think this is for everybody who's creative, like that would be really my wish, that don't be afraid of change. Use the change as something which gives us the opportunity to shape, to form, to be part of it, and to really, well, be creative. Thank you very much.